Hey everybody, welcome to class today. We're going to talk today a little bit about voting behavior. So let's get rolling here. We're going to introduce some new terms to you today. One is efficacy. We're going to talk about who's likely to participate in politics. We're also going to talk about why some people don't vote. And we're also going to talk about some examples of barriers um, to voting and some trends in voting. You're also going to do an activity where, in your role, you will plan to increase voter turnout or develop a plan to increase voter turnout. So let's take a look at this here. I really like this cartoon. It says, "After the election, I'll do my part." And why? Because literally in America, this is what we see. We see people that don't vote. All they want to do is complain. So we've been talking about political participation. We've been talking about getting involved. We just got done talking about elections. And the biggest way that people participate in American politics is to vote. The interesting thing is, the United States usually has a lower voter turnout than any other Western country. We usually only have about 38% of voters vote in non presidential elections. So think about that for a minute. 38% of the people in America of registered voters are the only ones that are choosing people that aren't the president. Some say it's a rational choice not to vote. Some people believe that it's a civic duty that they should be voting, that a citizen should always vote. But in America, people just don't vote. You can see here, this is a chart, it's in your book, but it's a little old. But it does show you how voter turnout has declined in several years. They almost had 80% of registered voters in the 1800 vote, in 1892 vote. But as you get to 2004, you're right around 50%, 55, 56%. And even now, it's lower. It's amazing to me that people don't go and vote. Um, so, this term, political efficacy. This is the belief that your participation really matters. Um, this is one of the things that lead us to our discussion when we talk about why people vote and why they don't. Um, if you have a high political efficacy, you believe that your vote matters a lot. If you have a low political efficacy, you believe that your vote doesn't matter one little bit. There are two types of efficacy beyond what I just described. One that's called internal efficacy, where you understand politics and will engage, and another type of efficacy is called external efficacy. This is where you do things because you believe the government will respond to your demands. And I do love this cartoon as well. Don't vote, don't complain, right? If you want something to happen, if you care, you will vote. So, biggest thing, why don't people vote? The biggest barrier to voting that we have in America is voter registration. Um, it's a system adopted by all the states that requires voters to register in advance of election day. But we have over one third of Americans aren't registered to vote. Why don't people register? Well, some people say it's too difficult. In many states, you need an ID to register to vote. So there are some barriers to voting. And when you move from state to state, the registration procedures are different. So that can create some difficulty for people to voting. One of the ways that they tried to get more people to vote was in 1993, they passed a law called the Motor Voter Act. And this required states to permit people to register to vote when they get their driver's license. So literally, you go in to get your driver's license, they say, "Do you want to be registered to vote?" And when you say yes, they click the button and you're registered to vote. Remember that when you renew your driver's license when you turn 18, you can register to vote. Other reasons why people don't vote, sometimes it's during the workday. They don't want to go early in the morning, they don't want to go late at night, so they don't vote. Weather. People don't want to stand in line when it's raining. If the polls are busy and it's raining, people won't go and vote. And other people don't go and vote because they don't know the candidates. Okay? They say that, well, I don't know anything, so I'm not going to vote. Those friends are usually the ones that are typically complaining the most about things. Um, when we try to decide the person who it is likely to vote and who isn't likely to vote, the number one factor is education. Bottom line is the more education you have, the more likely you are to vote. Um, Education is also linked to socioeconomic status, which means how much money you have. Usually, the more money you have is linked to how much education you have. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote, so your age is important. Um, your race, if you're Caucasian, you're more likely to vote, but other ethnicities are higher with comparable education. Gender wise, females are more likely to vote than men. In the last election, we had like 66% of females vote. We've seen that trend going up in these past elections. Um, Also, who votes? If you're married, you're more likely to vote. If you're in a union, you're more likely to vote. And the traits are cumulative. So if you have a bunch of these traits, like you're married, you're in a union, you're educated, and you're a woman, you are going to go vote. And this chart here kind of shows you that. Money's linked to it, marriage is linked to it, age is linked to it. All these things determine whether or not you're going to vote. So when you're talking about voting, these are things to keep in mind. Some trends that we've seen in voting, right? In the history of our country, we've seen lots of different trends in voting. Trend number one is called the expansion of the electorate. All right, we want to see more and more people vote. In the 1830s, the only thing you had was all white males can vote, no property requirements. Before they were property requirements, so we're expanding the electorate. By the way, the electorate are the people that get to vote. In the 1870s, with the 15th Amendment, all right, we say voting cannot be based on race. Okay, so we're allowing all the former slaves to vote. Um, they used to try to keep people out from poll taxes, making people pay a tax to vote, trying to eliminate poor people from voting. But we have amendments to the Constitution which get rid of things like literacy tests, like grandfather clauses. It says if your grandfather was a slave, you're not allowed to vote. We also have amendments to the Constitution, the 19th Amendment, allowing women the right to vote. All these things are expanding the electorate. In the history of our country, that's what they try to do, include more and more people, getting them voting. Another trend we see to expand the electorate in the Voting Rights Act of 1965, um, which outlaws literacy tests, trying to encourage more African Americans to vote. In 1961, we expand the electorate, allowing the District of Columbia to vote in presidential elections. In 1972, we had the 26th Amendment, lowering the voting age to 18 years old. All these things are done to expand the electorate, to get more people to vote. The second big trend that we see is the shift from states deciding who votes to the federal government deciding who gets to vote. We mentioned before back here all these literacy tests and poll taxes and grandfather clauses. A lot of those were enacted by individual states. As we hit the 1960s and into the 70s, the national government is not going to allow states to exclude people anymore. The federal government now controls the when, the how, and the who of elections. Again, trying to get more people to vote. Um, we mentioned other types of participation. Uh, Other types of political participation that exist, protest. We've talked about this a little bit. Contacting public officials, participating in community issues, contributing to campaigns, and working on campaigns. All these things, all these are things that you can do to participate in government other than voting. If you have questions about this, let me know. As you finish taking notes on this stuff today, make sure you look to Google Classroom and complete the activity that is there. Have a great day, everybody.